What's up, everybody? I'm David Haig. Welcome to episode number 280 of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the link with your friends. If you'd like to get the curriculum, you can get the paperback or ebook of From Ashes to Destiny on Amazon. Again, today's episode is number 280 of the A2D from Addict to Disciple podcast, and it's entitled Off the Rails. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about why we go off the rails. And my regular listeners know often when I use things that occur naturally or in nature or in life, I look at how they repair that or how they see what caused that and try to tie that into addiction and recovery. So today we're going to looking at why trains go off the rails and why do people go off the rails. So what's the origin of the phrase go off the rails? Well, even before there were railroads, there were wooden rails used to guide or support trams and wagons and mine carts to wheel the stuff in and out of the mine to get it out to the surface. And things falling off the rails were a common occurrence. If we start to look at a definition then of what it means to go off the rails, it started out as sort of anything that suddenly went off course and caused a wreck, so to speak. The Dictionary of Oxford Languages says going off the rails means that someone begins behaving in a strange, abnormal, or wildly uncontrolled way. So it's talking about losing control and starting to behave in a way that is alarming, is not normal, not acceptable. It also can include starting to do dishonest or illegal things, starting to get involved in crime or what have you. And when we hear people talk about going off the rails, often as I talk to parents, they'll say, yeah, he went off the rails when he started drinking, or he went off the rails when he switched from weed and tried crystal meth or crack cocaine for the first time. I hear other parents say, he or she went off the rails when they went to college. I thought they were going to university for an education and they ended up going there to party and they really went off the rails. And I often hear of people in midlife talking about going off the rails after a breakup or a divorce or a death in the family or losing a job. So there's lots of things that can cause us to go off the rails in life occurrences. And the thing is really, how do we handle it? And I like a quote by Ilona Andrews who said, when I went off the rails, I didn't do it halfway. No, I flipped a few times, caught a lot of air, and then exploded in a fiery crash. Is that you? When you went off the rails, did you do it in a big way, not halfway, that you just exploded in a fiery crash? And Ozzy Osbourne once said, mental wounds not healing. Who and what's to blame? I'm going off the rails on a crazy train. And I think that can be a key thing at looking at what causes us to go off the rails when we've got this trauma that happened and we have an emotional wound, we have a mental wound that's just not healing. And we don't know who to blame, we don't know what to blame, but it feels like all of a sudden we're going off the rails on a crazy train. I also talk to people in rehab or after they've relapsed after going to rehab. And a common thing I hear from them ties into an anonymous quote that I found, which says, you've been a well-behaved adult for 4 months now, but it's time to go off the rails again. And I hear that from guys who've been at rehab, doing well, they get 4, 5, 6 months clean, and then they go off the rails, whether it's just because they've been well behaved for too long and it's time to just get reckless and party, or they're just got this itch inside that they can't scratch, so to speak. But that's a common one. And I think it ties into the nervousness around the next step after rehab and getting back with family or back into work or back into a place and sort of get into acceptable lifestyle. But let's get back to the trains. I said we were going to look at what they do. And first, I want to talk about the fact that in 2022, according to stuff I found online, there were more than 1,000 train derailments in the United States alone. It was actually over 1,100 train derailments, according to the Federal Railroad Administration. So that means that just in the US, we're averaging roughly 3 train derailments per day, which is huge. So, of course, the Federal Railroad Administration did detailed studies to say what causes these train derailments. And again, I'd like to compare them to what causes train derailments in our lives. The first thing they said, and the primary cause, was track defects. And this, they said, includes cracks and misaligned rails, loose or missing ties. So there's a problem with the track that the train is running on. It's sort of saying stuff gets worn out or worn down and it isn't maintained, repaired, or replaced on time. So I'd like to ask you a question in this category. What could be your track defects? Could you have an old vision that you haven't maintained, repaired, or updated, or replaced, or your purpose in life, your goals, your dreams? Have these things that sort of kept you on track gotten stale? And it's the same thing as like defects now in your track, and then it's time to derail because it's hard to stay on track. The second reason they said for trains is human error. And this, they talked about improper train handling. So the driver exceeding speed limits, failing to follow safety procedures, or simply driver fatigue, and he just sort of wasn't paying attention. And I want to ask you, what could be your human error in recovery, or what could be your human error that leads you to going off the rails? Are there things that you're getting reckless about, that you're exceeding the speed limits? Are you running on empty? Has the strain of life drained you dry? Or have you, like the fatigued driver of a train, are you just sort of blasé and tired and not paying the attention that you should be paying to the things that keep you on track? The third thing they talk about is mechanical failures. And in this area, they talk about issues with the train's wheels or axles or couplers, things in the train that can lead to derailment. And I want to ask you, if, what are you doing to maintain your physical health, your wheels, your axles, so that you don't get derailed? Or what are some things that you should have been working on, but you've got that old cliche, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you figure, well, I've lived with it this long, I can live with it longer, without even realizing it may be one defect, maybe a defect in character that led to past derailments and may lead to future derailments. The fourth factor that the Railroad Commission looked at was environmental factors. And this, they talked about extreme weather like heavy snow, landslides, avalanches, flooding, all kinds of things that in the environment could mess up the track or mess up the train and lead to derailment. And in this area, I want to ask you, what are the storms of life in your life? How have they caused damage to you during the storm and residual damage even after the storm passes that could lead to your derailment, to you going off the rails. And the fifth and final cause, they say in this study by the Railroad Commission, was collisions, where they say they just impact another object, whether it's another train, whether it's a vehicle crossing the tracks or an animal running into it. So these collisions obviously can then knock the train off the rails. So I want to ask you, what are the people or what are the things that sort of run into your path head on and form the collision that cause you to go off the rails? Is it your old dealer, an old person you had a relationship with? Is it family that embarrasses you and it smacks you right between the eyes, just like a head-on collision? So it's important to look at that and look at these things. Again, I'm going to just mention the five so that you can think about them. So the first one is track defects. And I talked about keeping and maintaining your vision and your purpose and your goals. Human error, where maybe running on empty or running reckless. Mechanical failures, where we need to maintain our health and our physical strength. Environmental factors like the storms in life, and head-on collisions. And I'd like to close with a quote that sort of ties in, and I like it. It's an anonymous quote that says, "The longer you stay on the wrong train, the more expensive it is to get back home. This isn't about trains." So that one just tells me, yeah, sometimes we go off the rails and we quickly get on another train and we just stay on that train because it feels like safety. It feels like we're going someplace, but it's the wrong train. And the longer we stay on it, the further and further we get away from home. Thanks for listening to this episode of the A2D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you were saying that's me as you listened, then I want to encourage you to join a group, find people to talk to, your coach, your counselor, whoever. If you'd like to contact me, you can send me a message in the link in this podcast or by email at davidfroma2d@gmail.com, or go to my website, www.froma2d.org, and click on the contact page. Keep listening to future podcast episodes, and as always, stay safe and stay resilient.